Based on a popular webtoon series, the show is very much anticipated to be one of the best action thriller series of 2023. It revolves around a section of students who are tricked to join the war against the aliens in exchange for extra points for college. Will your favorite student make it out alive until the end? This is Duty After School, directed by Seong Young-il. In Sungjin High School, teenagers are living their normal student lives. This, however, is even though there are weird-looking spheres floating in the sky. About a year ago, spheres suddenly appeared floating in the skies all over the world, except for polar regions and some areas in Russia. As expected, many people got scared and thought that it would be the end of the world or that aliens would be coming to invade Earth. In turn, military actions were done in an attempt to put down the sphere. But instead of decreasing, their numbers just doubled until the military decided to stop attacking. Instead, scientific approaches were done to analyze if the spheres were indeed a threat to mankind. Luckily, they concluded that the spheres were harmless, at least for the time being. Because of that, people's lives returned to normal, except for the fact that travel via airplane is impossible anymore. Regardless, this didn't stop rumors and conspiracy theories from spreading, as there are still people who think that spheres will eventually fall out of the skies one day. Until that day indeed happened. The military responds immediately, but they don't know what to do as there are no protocols implemented to deal with it yet. However, a stupid divisional commander orders one of them to shoot it with a cannon. And just like that, their lives are ended when the spheres suddenly attack them, leaving only a few survivors left. 1 month later, Miss Park, the homeroom teacher of class 3 to 2, is called to the teacher's office along with other classroom advisors. As it turns out, the military decides to enlist every high school senior in the military and train them in preparation to fight the spheres. In exchange for their service, they will be given additional CSAT points, which are very important in entering college. In that sense, the students are given consent forms for their parents to sign. In class 3 to 2, the others are willing to join for the said extra points, but the others don't want to do so. Yet, all of them still come back the next day, carrying their signed consent forms. Class 3 to 2 consists of Chae-yeol, Dukjong, Nara, Yoojung, Ilha, Soyin, Youngsu, Bora, Soon-yi, Soyoon, Yeonju, Junhee, Asol, Hana, Inhai, Suchul, Taman, Wootak, Jangsu, Yeonshin, Hirak, and Younghoon. Their platoon commander is Lieutenant Lee, one of the few survivors of the first ever sphere attack, so he is strict and firm to the class. Helping him is Sergeant Won Bin, his faithful assistant who always got his back through thick and thin. Lee meets the class for the first time and So Yin immediately develops a crush on him. After explaining the training routine to the students, Lee appoints Yoo Jung as senior private because she's the class president. Also, he assigns Chae-yeol to be the clerk who will be recording and documenting their everyday lives to be sent to their parents at home. With that, Yoo Jung and Chae-yeol get 3 additional points right off the bat, surprising the class. On their first day in training, everyone is given their rifle, which are real ones and not dummies. Class 3 to 2 then starts goofing around with the gun, so they're punished by Lee. Later that night, Young-hoon cannot focus on studying as the other boys are too loud because of the video that Ilha shows them. Because of that, he tells Lee that Ilha still has his phone, pissing him off. He is about to hit Young-hoon, but the lieutenant stops him and orders the two to run an errand for him. However, Young-hoon and Ilha continue fighting outside. Chae-yeol, who's throwing the garbage, tries to stop them, but they only stop when a sphere falls near them. And to their surprise, it opens up, revealing a flower-like alien and devouring Young-hoon whole. After knowing the incident, Miss Park asks the lieutenant to just let the kids go home. However, Lee is also just following orders, so he cannot allow it. Worse, he asks Miss Park to convince Chae-yeol and Ilha to lie about what happened to Young-hoon. The two students agree, telling others that Young-hoon just got injured so he had to go home. As days go by, the students are slowly getting used to their new normal, even though keeping up with their training is still a challenge for them. In addition, it just gets more intense as the commander orders the platoon leaders to teach the students how to use the gun due to the recent falling of the spheres all over South Korea. One day, the students go out of the campus for the first time after again since their training began for their practice shooting. Seeing the streets empty, they all wonder where everybody is. Some time later, they reach their destination and begin training. Out of everybody, Nara shows the most consistency in shooting, earning praise from the lieutenant. Afterward, they start heading back to school when Lee and Won Bin stop the group to investigate a noise nearby. While the soldiers are busy, Taiman and Hirak sneak away from the group to go to a convenience store. After a while, Ms. Park notices that her students are incomplete and alerts the other soldiers that 2 of them are missing. When they head out to find the 2 boys, Young-soo informs Ms. Park that he overheard Hirak and Taeman earlier that they will go to a convenience store. Knowing this, she takes Yoo-jung with her to find the 2, but instead of her classmates, Yoo-jung finds a mutilated hand and screams in horror, alerting her teacher and classmates. Meanwhile, Lee and Wonbin discover a hole in the ground, signifying that a sphere fell in the area but it's currently missing. Going back to the class, the other students see the horror in the streets and start freaking out. Ms. Park, on the other hand, maintains her calm and proceeds to investigate the situation. Seeing her, Chae-yeol nervously blurts out that the spheres might have killed these people like they did to Young-hoon, accidentally revealing to the class their classmates' unfortunate fate. Just then, Ms. Park finds out that the dead bodies were from students of another school. Realizing what danger her students are in, she screams for them to run. And at that moment, Class 3-2 witnesses Ms. Park's demise in the tentacles of the spheres, which are smaller than what attacked Young-hoon. Scared, the students run as fast as they can, resulting in them getting separated. Luckily, they're all rescued by Lee and Wonbin, and they all go back to school. Because of what happened, most of the class wants to go home. However, Lee stops them by making them realize that they're still not safe from spheres even if they get home. Yet, despite knowing that the lieutenant is right, they still want to go home. Due to this, the whole class starts to argue, so Taeman tries to calm the situation down by admitting that it's his and Hirak's fault that Ms. Park died. To settle what they will do, they decide to vote on whether they will go home or not. As expected, the majority wants to go, so the others are convinced as well, except Young-soo, who's still thinking about the extra points for CSAT. Because of that, Il-ha kicks in while So-hee begs him to vote to go home. With that, he finally agrees, even though it's not what he truly wanted. A little later, Yoo-jung and Yeon-shin go to Lee to submit the class-signed petition that they all want to go home. Despite sympathizing with the students, the lieutenant doesn't allow it, revealing to them that their parents were already evacuated to the shelters for their safety. Also, he points out that they're not merely students anymore but soldiers of their country, so they can not just lead whenever they please. This is then not received well by others, and they just break down crying. After the training, the class talks about how strict and ruthless the lieutenant is. Overhearing this, Wonbin states that someday they will realize that Lee cares for them more than anyone else. Later on, everyone gathers up and comes up with a plan to confirm if their parents were truly not home by going to Chae-yeol's house, which is the nearest to the school. So, Chae-yeol, Dokjong, Young-shin, and Jang-soo try to sneak out, but they just get caught. In turn, the whole class is punished. But what surprises them more is Lee's remarks that if anyone tries to leave without permission, he will order Wonbin to shoot them. However, Class 3-2 is still not giving up. The next day, they tell other classes the truth about the spheres and convince them to rally at the gate so they can all go home. At first, the plan seems to be going well, even though the commander threatens that they won't receive additional CSAT points. But to everyone's horror, spheres start falling from the sky and chaos ensues in Sungjin High. Acting quickly, Lee and Wonbin gather Class 3-2 and order them to gear up, giving them depleted uranium bullets that can kill spheres. Luckily, Nara and Jang-soo are a big help in fighting the spheres until they reach the 2 trucks that they will use to evacuate. Unfortunately, not all of them make it, as Woo-tak and In-hai die during the chaos, along with other students in other classes. However, not all of them are taken into safety, as the truck where Chae-yeol, Hirak, Yeonju, So-yin, Joon-hee, So-yoon, Soo-chul Ta-man, Jang-soo, Young-shin, and Soon-ye are is attacked, leaving the students stranded somewhere they don't know. They argue whether to stay or find shelter, considering that So-yin is badly wounded. Luckily, Chae-yeol finds a house nearby, so they decide to head there. Meanwhile, the truck where Lee, Wonbin, and the other students finally arrive at the camp. After a while, they notice that the others are not yet arriving. In this sense, Lee asks permission from his commanding officer to look for the students, but he gets declined. Because of that, he and Wonbin come up with a plan and steal a truck so he can find them. Going back to the other group, they settle down and attend to So-yin's wounds, but her condition is not getting any better. To make matters worse, a sphere shows up and they're out of ammo already. With that, they trap the sphere inside the house and run for the garage, where they find a truck. However, the key gets thrown behind a cabinet as Hirak and So-yoon fight over it. With the sphere barging into the garage, they decide to draw lots to see who's going to distract it, while the others continue to get the key and drive off. Hirak gets the shortest stick, but he doesn't want to go, so Jang-soo volunteers, giving enough time for his classmates to escape. Yet, to his surprise, Hirak comes back for him and helps him fight the sphere. However, they cannot kill it no matter what they do. Fortunately, Lee arrives just in time to save them, along with their other classmates who hitch a ride with the lieutenant upon knowing that he will save the others. Some time later, they reach the camp and are welcomed by Wonbin and Young-soo, who didn't join the rescue because he didn't want to be penalized if the others got caught. Speaking of penalty, Lee is spared a punishment as he indeed brought the kids back to safety. With the tides of battle at the moment, they will be needing as many soldiers as they can provide. Weeks passed and the training of the students continued. However, the military still has no idea how to completely eradicate the spheres. Based on their theory, they believe that spheres feed on humans, hence the larger numbers of spheres in cities compared to the countryside and mountains. Although they are already working on a cryogenic weapon as the spheres turned out to be weak against cold, a high-ranking official orders an immediate assault, reasoning that they cannot just wait for the weapon to be made or for the winter to come to attack. And worse, Class 3-2 is one of the 4 platoons that will be sent to the field. Despite promising that they will be going home after finishing the mission, the students can't help but be afraid for their lives. Because of this, Lee and Wonbin are conflicted if they will ask the students to write their last will, a common deed in the military before a soldier goes on a mission. Unknown to them, Yoo-jung hears them and takes the paper to her classmates and asks them to do it. As expected, many of them freak out, blaming Yoo-jung for making them do such a thing. Tai-man then comes to her rescue until the situation calms down. In the end, they all cannot sleep, so they just write their last will as instructed after having deep talks with each other. Just then, Lee and Wonbin realize that the papers are missing, being surprised that Yoo-jung takes the initiative to do it. With that, the 2 soldiers come up with an idea to lighten up the mood, especially since none of the students were able to eat during dinner due to stress and fear. They throw a little party for the kids and they have a good time together. Lee even allows So-yeon to ask him if he has a girlfriend, but the lieutenant says none. And for the rest of the night, everybody has a good time before facing reality. The following day, Class 3-2 was divided into 2 groups, with each group having 1 sphere detector. With that, they head to the nearest town with a mission to clear it. Not long after, the spheres show up and the students, Lee and Wonbin, fight them. At this time, the students can somehow fend off themselves already, except for a few like Aesol, Young-soo, and Sun-yi. Due to this, the spheres retreat, forcing the platoon to raid every house to eliminate them. But to their surprise, they find another student from another school, wounded and shocked by her fight with the spheres. Some time later, they find more survivors and head to the nearest shelter, only to find out that it was attacked by the spheres. In this sense, Lee and Wonbin wonder how it happened, pointing out that shelters were purposely assigned on the outskirts of the city where few spheres are present. On the other hand, Class 3-2 starts to worry about the safety of their parents and other shelters. According to the survivors, they were tasked to deliver supplies to the shelter, but they were attacked by spheres when they arrived. Worse, their platoon commander left them during the chaos, leaving them to die while cowardly saving himself. Later that night, Yoo-jung notices one of the survivors leaving the group, so she follows her. She asks if she's fine, but the survivor is clearly suffering a mental breakdown, blaming herself for the death of her friends. And to Yoo-jung's shock, the survivor plans to take herself out. But when Lee shows up, and she suddenly points the gun at him, shooting the lieutenant instead as she shifts the blame on the adults for using them, high schoolers, in the war. However, it's not Lee who is shot, but Wonbin, who appears out of nowhere to save his lieutenant. Fortunately, Wonbin isn't fatally wounded. When he stabilizes, he and Lee feel for the survivor as they also know that they lied to the students time and time again just for them to follow their orders. Because of that, the 2 decide to do the right thing and return to base the next day. Meanwhile, Chae-yeol and Naira are on watch for the night. Chae-yeol, who has a crush on Naira, has been contemplating if he will confess but decides otherwise. At this time, Naira spots some spheres from the distance as if they're exchanging signals with the one that's still floating. Immediately telling this to Lee, he finally realizes that the spheres are intelligent enough to communicate, hence their attack on the shelters and neighborhoods outside the city. Because of that, Lee tells the class that they will be withdrawing first thing in the morning. Unexpectedly, the class decides to stay, wanting to help the nearby shelter where they think that the spheres are attacking next. The next morning, Lee comes up with a plan to lure and trap the spheres in one of the buildings in the shelter. Then, they will blow them up using handmade explosives. With that, they begin to start planting bombs all over the building. However, the spheres move earlier than expected, so the students are forced to sound the alarm to lure them even though the others are not yet done placing the bombs. Not wanting any of the students to die, Lee orders them to go to safety while he stays to finish setting up the bombs. So Yin wants to stay behind with him, but he insists that they should all go so her classmates drag her away. After a little while, Lee finishes placing the bombs, just in time for the spheres to start flooding the building. He tries to find a way out but soon realizes that he will not make it in time to safety without jeopardizing the plan. As a result, Lee radios the others from the other building, reminding them to always stick together and protect each other. He then orders Wonbin to blow up the building, but he cannot do it. Due to that, Yoo-jung is forced to make the hard call, triggering the bomb as the whole class breaks down crying, especially So Yen, who didn't get the chance to confess her feelings for Lee. A month later, Class 3-2 has changed since the passing of Lieutenant Lee. All of them are far from the crybabies that are scared of spheres back in Sungjin High. Currently, they're on their own in a town outside of Seoul, taking out as many spheres as they can. Even without the supervision of Wonbin, Yoo-jung is doing a great job as the class acting platoon leader. Also, they are now all more than capable of facing and killing spheres on their own. They're settling in a service area that they turn into their base where they have enough supplies of food and ammo that will last them until they receive new orders from the camp. As it turns out, their radio has been broken, so while they are finding a way to fix it, they're exterminating spheres for the time being. Driven by Lee's death, all of them continue the mission to take back South Korea from the spheres. But still, they vote every once in a while to decide if they will continue or just go home. Remembering Lee's last words, they will all stick together, whether they all fight or they all go home. Later that night, an election happens and the results state that the majority voted to stay on the mission. As expected, this frustrates those who wanted to go like Hee-rak and Soon-yae. Yet, they still respect the outcome of the election. The next day, Class 3-2 is divided into two groups for two separate missions. Kaiyul, Nara, Suchul, Ilha, Youngsu, Sunyi, Yenju, and So-Yan will go to the hospital to gather some supplies. The other group consists of Yoo-jung, Bora, Aesol, So-yoon, Ta-man, Jang-soo, Young-shin, and Hee-rak will then head to the nearby penitentiary where they will look for radio parts that they can use to repair the radio. And to guard the base, Duk-jong, Hana, and June he will be staying. With that, they go their separate ways, hoping to bring some good news upon going home. However, Life has different plans for the Class 3-2. When the others are gone, Duk-jong, Hana, and June he encounters some people who stumble upon their base. The group of strangers seems to be targeting their food and ammo supplies, so the three confront them. As it turns out, the group is just a bunch of other students from a different high school who decide to go back to Seoul after discovering that CSAT has been canceled this year. They explain that the news was broadcasted on every radio of all platoons out there. But because theirs is broken, Class 3-2 didn't receive the news. Knowing this, one of the students offers to fix their radio for them, only to find out that it wasn't broken but purposely sabotaged instead. Meanwhile, at the hospital, everything seems going well as they find not just boxes of medicines, but also a military truck that has weapons in it. However, as Chae-il tries to record a confession video for Nara, he hears Soo-chul arguing with somebody at the fire exit. He checks in on him, but he finds no one but him alone. Then, later on, everyone hears a gunshot, followed by Soo-chul falling from one of the higher floors, resulting in his untimely death. But what surprises them more is when Soon-yi finds voting ballots in Soo-chul's pockets, causing them to think that he was rigging the elections. Concurrently, the other group in the penitentiary separates to cover more ground. Shortly after, they hear thumping noises, signaling that somebody is still at the prison and discovering that there are still criminals left in there. The prisoners don't have any idea what's going on, but they order the students to free them. As expected, the students are conflicted because they know they can't free them, but they still don't want the prisoners to starve. Due to that, they just decide to give them food and promise to come back for them. While this is happening, Aesol notices a prisoner who is not eating and seems to be sick. He then begs Aesol to call his mom for him, giving Aesol the expression that this man is different from the others. So when the others are busy as they go back looking for radio parts, Aesol frees the man, not knowing that he's actually the leader and the most psychotic of the bunch. The others then hear her scream, and they find her being held hostage by the prisoners who are now free. Acting quickly, Young-shin locks the gate so they cannot get out. The group talks about how they can rescue Aesol just in time for the spheres to come into action. With that, they pretend to agree to the demands of the prisoners to free them and leave them the unloaded guns. Then, one by one, they are attacked by spheres. However, the psychotic leader catches up to Bora and Aesol, but they are rescued by one of the prisoners who survived the spheres as he kills the psychotic man and leaves the students. As they go back to base, everyone is so exhausted that they can't even tell Duk-jong and the others what happened. But as the hospital group comes back, they are burdened by more bad news as they carry Soo-chul's dead body. Soon-yi then tells everyone about the ballot she found, stating that Soo-chul had been rigging the election. At this time, Hannah also reveals to the class that their radio was sabotaged on purpose and that CSAT was already canceled, telling them about the other group of students that showed up while they were gone. Just then, everyone starts to argue with one another as they start to suspect each other of being a traitor. But to their surprise, Il-ha, Yoo-jung, and Jang-soo admit that they were the ones rigging the elections. According to Il-ha, he and Soo-chul were on guarding duty when they heard about the cancellation of CSAT. However, Soo-chul wanted to eradicate all the spheres, and he knew that if the others learned that CSAT was canceled, they would all go home. Il-ha then agreed, as he also wanted to wipe out the aliens, so Soo-chul sabotaged the radio. A few days later, the two overheard Yoo-jung and Jang-soo talking about rigging the elections. Yoo-jung convinced Jang-soo to fake the results as she didn't want the class to go back to Seoul blindly without knowing if they were even allowed to go home or not. Also, she is concerned that the more they get near Seoul, the more spheres will appear. Hence, she wanted to manipulate the results of the election just until they fixed the radio. With that, Soo-chul and Il-ha revealed to them everything, and the four of them started working together ever since. After this confession, everyone loses trust in Yoo-jung, Jang-soo, and Il-ha. However, Young-soo is more concerned that CSAT has been canceled as he's obsessed with it a lot. As it turns out, Young-soo came from a poor family, and CSAT is his ticket to get into a good college to have a good job in the future for him to provide for his family. In this sense, he begs them all to stay, but everyone has already decided to go home. With that, everyone packs up and starts heading back to Seoul the following day. After spending a few days on the road, the class finds an abandoned amusement park, so they settle there for the night. At this time, they finally forgive Yoo-jung, Jang-soo, and Il-ha, realizing that they just did what they did out of good intentions. And to their surprise, So-yoon and Young-shin bring the power back to the amusement park. After making sure that there are no spheres around, the students finally have their fun months after the war broke out. After some time, they decide to take a group photo using Chae-yul's video camera. But to everyone's surprise, there is a video of Soo-chul in there, confessing his mistakes. However, he gets attacked by spheres, ultimately causing his death. Seeing this, the class finally gets a closure, feeling relieved that Soo-chul's death is not any of them, especially Il-ha. Yet, while the others are having fun, Young-soo finds a newspaper that states that the CSAT isn't canceled. Seeing this, he celebrates and plans to show it to others. So when he comes across So-yin, he shows it to her, only for her to slap him with the truth that it's an old issue. Because of that, something ticks inside Young-soo, and he starts assaulting So-yin, ending up pushing her so hard that she loses consciousness. Worse, he doesn't stop there and starts violating her. Just then, Il-ha sees this and attacks Young-soo for disrespecting their classmate. This leads to a fight, ending up with Young-soo shooting Il-ha dead. After that, he drags his body into the ocean, just in time for the others to arrive as they hear the gunshot. Young-soo lies to them that a sphere attacked So-yin, and it got Il-ha when he tried to help. At this time, their detector warns them that a swarm of spheres is coming their way, so they immediately escape. Luckily, they find a school to settle in, unconsciously going to the room labeled Class 3-2 and going to their designated seats. There, everybody feels sad about Il-ha's death, so they all decide to go back to the amusement park the next day to look for his body. This freaks out Young-soo because he will be busted if that happens. Stepping outside the school, he starts to lose his head as he tries to justify what he did. He also sees Il-ha, pointing out that he's a murderer now. To make matters worse, Young-soo sees and overhears So-yin and Jang-soo talking about what happened back there. Although she cannot remember that much, she insists that there wasn't any sphere at the time. And this serves as the final straw for Young-soo as he totally loses his mind. With that, he goes into the room and shoots everyone, planning to kill them all. Young-soo knows that if what he did to Il-ha and So-yin got out, it will be the end for his future, so he takes matters into his own hands and kills his classmates. In the end, he fails miserably as he dies in the hands of Asol, leaving her, Chae-yul, Nara, and Hannah as the only survivors of Class 3-2. 2 years later, Chae-yul sits in the CSAT exam room, contemplating if he really deserves to be there. According to him, a few weeks later after that tragic night, the military finishes the weapon to fight the spheres and ends the war in a sweep. He feels like all their sacrifices, especially his classmates, were all in vain. Because of that, he decides not to take the exam, just like his other classmates didn't get the chance to take theirs. The series ends with Chae-yul walking out of the school, imagining the life they all could have if the war didn't happen at all. Duty After School pulls the biggest plot twist in the end by killing a lot of its main characters, which is way different from its webtoon source. Although many people were disappointed with this change, this opens up a lot of possibilities for the series, especially since Part 3 is rumored to be in the works. Overall, Duty After School is a great series to watch and will definitely make you crave for more episodes.